This is Gemara Horayos, Daf Beis, and as we begin a new Masechta, bit of a difficult Masechta, but a short one as we will see. We like once again to all the learning to be an incredible schos aliyas neshama for Esther Reyzel, Basar Meir, B'siyata D'Shemaya. The incredible Kayach HaTorah, the incredible Kayach HaTorah as we begin a new Masechta with a new vigor, a new excitement, a new desire to conquer and to chazer, should bring the neshama of Esther Reyzel Basar Meir to an incredibly high place in Gan Eden Shel Maila. So we open up a Masechta with the word Horayos, and as we'll see, or Hayru, I should say, which means a psak halacha, Hayra. And really, the basis of this Masechta to begin is going to be, we know, all the way back from our Gemara in Shabbos days, the very beginning of Daf Yomi, that an Aveira that was done by Mezid that would dictate a chi of kares, when done b'shoigeg, you bring a carbon chatos. And in general, a carbon chatos, what is a shoigeg, what is a mistake? It's either the item that he thinks is mutter, or he messes up in halacha, meaning either there's two items in front of him, and he thinks this is the kosher food and it was not. That's one level of shaygig. It's one level of inadvertence and one level of making a mistake. The other level is that he thought a certain action was mutter and it was not. But our Masechta, the Masechta of Horayos, Masechta of Hayru, of Psak Halacha, is going to be not that you made a mistake, but that Bezdin made a mistake and you did an Aveira based upon Bezdin's mistake. How do we view that? When is there a Chiyuv and when is there not? So says the Mishnah, Hayru Bezdin lavar lachas kol mitzvahs amuras batayra. If Bezdin paskind to do to transgress one of the mitzvahs in the Torah, the top Rashi gives us the example, which will be our quintessential example. For example, they paskind the chilev or dam is mutter, two forbidden foods. And then what happened after such a psak from Bezdin, now a singular person comes and he goes and he does something quote unquote b'shoigeg. It's inadvertent because he thought it was mutter based on their psak. Says the Mishnah, Bein she'asu v'asa imahem, whether the Bezdin themselves did it, they themselves ate this chaylev, and then this singular person ate it with them, or Bein she'asu v'asa achreihem, or whether the Bezdin did it, and then this singular person did it after him, or Bein she'loi asu, but whether Bezdin didn't actually do it, but they just paskined it was mutter. V'asa, and then this singular guy did this Aveira. So we have three cases of an Aveira that was done based on a psak Bezdin. Says the Mishnah, Potter, there is no chi of carbon. Why? Mibnei shetala bidas bebezdin, because you relied on the Bezdin, and therefore there will be no chi of carbon in this case. As Rashi says, you're Potter being a kisvos ira. Why? Because you did it based on the Psak Bezdin. Part A of the Mishnah. Part B of the Mishnah. Hayru Bezdin v'yada echa me'em sheta'u. Bezdin paskin, then one person knows that Bezdin is wrong. Oy Talmud, or a Talmud who rayu le'ira, and he's rayu to paskin halacha. He's fitting to Psak halacha, and he knows that Bezdin is making a mistake. And even though he knows it's a mistake, he still listens to Bezdin. Now, whether Bezdin themselves did and he did it as well. Whether Bezdin themselves ate and he ate it afterwards. Whether Bezdin didn't do it at all, they just paskin and he did. Even though there was the same psak halacha, but because in this case he knew the psak was wrong, so what is the general rule? We have two sides of the same coin over here. Part A and part B of the Mishnah. One who acts in sole agreeance with the Bezdin, he doesn't know any better, is pater from the carbon. One who knows better and still listens to Bezdin is chayiv in the carbon. Says the Mishnah, the klal is hatoyle ba'atzma you're chayiv, hatoyle bebezdin is pater. If someone acts on his own, there's going to be a chayiv. Someone acts on the word of Bezdin, he's going to be pater. So says the Mishnah, two different cases, one basic rule, as the Mishnah concludes, that if you did something on the word of Bezdin, which was an Aveira, pater from a carbon. You did something on the word of Bezdin, but you yourself knew Bezdin was wrong, chayiv in a carbon. Says the Gemara, there's a first cousin to these halachas. And the first cousin to these halachas is when the majority or all of the tzibur were to make a mistake, then the Bezdin themselves has to bring a carbon. A par helam davar shal tzibur. So says the Gemara, Amar Shmuel, Lo'ilam ein Bezdin chayavim. A Bezdin is not chayiv for a par helam davar shal tzibur when everyone listens to them, ad she'amru lahem mutarim atem, unless they tell people that it is mutter, and the people act on their word. Not just that they paskin it's mutter, but they paskin it's mutter la'asois, with the added kinech, to actually do it. My taima, lefi shaloi nigmara hayra, because if they didn't say la'asois, then it's not a conclusive psak halacha. So Rashi over here starts off and teaches us what's the case, as we spoke out. Let's just see it inside Rashi. Ki also hakahal oiruboy al pm. If the majority of Klal Yisrael acts based on Bezdin, koloimar bein lemandamer Bezdin meviyim par, bein lemandamer tzibur meviyim par. It's a machlekes, as we'll see, who brings this carbon. Is this a carbon brought by the people or brought by Bezdin, v'loi Bezdin? But either way, says Shmuel, and we'll see how this ties into our Mishnah in a moment. There's going to be no chiyav carbon until Bezdin paskins is mutter. Rav Dimi adds on that not just they paskin that it's mutter, but they say it's mutter la'asois to do it. Amar Abaye comes along Abaye, and Abaye proves. We also learned a Mishnah and Sanhedrin, that deals with the Zakein Mamrei, a Zakein and Talmud Chacham who doesn't listen to Sanhedrin. Tanina Chazar Liroi. If after someone a Zakein tries to paskin, Bezdin overrules him, and that Zakein goes back to his city, Shana V'li made. If he goes back and he still teaches the same way that he held, not like the Bezdin held, Kedar Shali made, Pater, halacha is, he's not called a chayiv azakin mamre, but hayra la'asois, like Rav Dimi said, not just a psak, but a la'asois. He adds on that la'asois, that you should actually do that which I'm saying. Then the halacha is chayiv, proving Abaye the shita of Rav Dimi. Amar Rav Abba, Afanana mitnina, another raya. Hayru la Bezdin li nasei. If Bezdin paskind that a woman's let her remarried v'holcha v'kilkala, and she goes and she doesn't remarry, but she is mizaneh, the halacha is she didn't listen to Bezdin. Chayeves b'karbon. Shleitira la ella lihi nasei. The only paskin for that she's allowed to get married. So again, we see that the only way is if you follow the script exactly like Bezdin says, la'a sois. Continues the Gemara, a third raya. Amar Avina v'nanami tanina, a third raya. Hayra Bezdin lava lachzikla mizamurz b'tayra. Our Mishnah, what did our Mishnah teach us? That a Bezdin paskin to be over one of the mitzvahs in the Torah. So what do we see? We see a similar halacha that a hayroi Bezdin, la'avar, said our Mishnah. La'avar is a similar terminology to la'asois, and that's the raya to Rav Dimi. Says the Gemara, Sulay Dami, we don't need to have any other rayos. 3 rayos, and we see Rav Dimi is correct. Says the Gemara that Shmuel, again, we have a din of Shmuel. We had Rav Dimi who argued on Shmuel about the Baral Davar Shal Tzibur. They need a higher level bezin to actually say La Asois. 3 rayas to Rav Dimi. Ikadi Amri, another Lashain, Amar Shmuel, and bezin Chavin Ad Shamru Lahem, Mutarim Atem La Asois. And this Lashain, Shmuel is the one that added on the word La Asois, and now Rav Dimi min Hardai. What did he say? Amar Afilu Mutarim Atem. Even if you just said Mutarim Atem Nigmar Hayra, that's enough. And this time Rav Dimi will call as being the Mekel. He's saying you don't have to actually add on the word La Asois. So now, the 3 rayas that we had a moment ago are now kashas on Rav Dimi. Amar Abaye comes like Abaye and he asks, did we not learn Chazal Asa Leroy? Vishana Limek Der Slimit, he's potter, but Hayroy Lasa is Yechayev, not like Rav Dimi. Amar Rav Abba, Valay Tananachi, did not learn Allah Bezin Nasi, Valchav Kukul Chayavis, Bekar Mixin, follow the script of Bezin. Shleitir Ali Nasi. And Amar Avina, our Mishal Tananachi, Ayur Bezin, love, or Lachzulam is Livers, Bataira. Says you are correct, Sulamidi. Now in this Lashon, it's a good kashan Rav Dimi, but each other, whether it's Rav Dimi or Shmuel, we proved conclusively with 3 sources that it's only if it's La Asois is there this Chiv. Now we get back into the din in our Mishnah that after Bezdin Paskind, what did the Mishnah teach us? The Yachid went and acted on their word. We said the Yachid is Potter. Ask the Gemara, V'nisni v'asal b'hem. Why did it say v'asa shoygeg al b'hem? Asal b'hem. This singular person listened to Bezdin. Shoygeg lamali, amarava, shoygeg lasu, yahir Bezdin shechele mutter. V'nis chalev loy chele v'shuman. We have what we would call a double mistake. Bezdin paskin that chelev, which is really aser, is mutter. And then what happened? And then when you sat down to eat it, what happened is that you thought you're eating shuman, permitted fats, and it was swapped. And it was swapped with what? Forbidden fats. But forbidden fats, that Bezdin just told you it's mutter. So you thought you were eating something mutter. You ended up eating something aser, but that Bezdin paskined it's mutter. Va'achlai, then the halach is your potter. The halach is your potter. Why? Because you thought that you ate shuman. Al PM mamish. So then we add on, the Mishnah adds on the word al PM to teach, in a regular case that you listen to Bezdin, you'd also be potter. So a dual case over here. Either a case that someone simply listened to Bezdin, as we read the Mishnah to start, there'd be no chiyuv because you listened to Bezdin, or in a case in which the foods got mixed up, and therefore you were shayig, you also would be potter. The Yamri, a second lashon, Amar Rava shayig al PM hu de potter, the exact opposite. Now the exact opposite. If you thought it was mutter, but lamaisa you ate treif, the maisa that's called a shayig. Then according to this lashon, you would be chayiv. Says Gemara Milsa b'shitla the Rava kamibayi lei lerami bar chama. That which was pashit to Rava, that when you mix up the case, the shuman and the chayla, that was a shayla to Bar Chama. The Bayer Bar Chama on the second wine line. Hayi Rebbe Shechlim Motev Nechalav Shema V'Achloi Ma'u Amar Rava Tashema. So says Rava, I'll bring you a raya. Tashema Alech Yachid V'Asa Shaygal Piyim from our Mishnah. Shaygal Piyim Lameli. Why did the Mishnah have to add on the words? Lav Lasu Rebbe Shechlim Motev Nechalav V'Chilev. So says Rava, that's the extra words. And the Mishnah comes to teach us. It says, and therefore it says the Gemara, that's why Rabbi Bar Chama wasn't convinced 100%. Now, Ikedi Amri, again, the exact same reverse. So again, we have the din of Nischaliv Lechelev Vishuman. First, Rava says you're potter. Ikedi Amri that you're chayiv. Rabbi Bar Chama had the Shaila. He was not convinced on the Mishnah. Now, Nacham al Ikedi again, 5 lines into the white lines. Amarav Tashma Asa Shagap PM, I love the Shagap PM. Who depart after the Chil of Shuman Vachlay, you're going to be chayiv. Says the Gemara, no, don't Shagap PM. Or Shagig Ayal Piliam. Maybe either case, and there'd be a ptur. Therefore, we have no raya. So says the Gemara, this aforementioned machlekes is bipilukta. This machlekes that we just had, machlekes Chama and Rava, in a case of nischalef shuman v'chelef, when the foods got mixed up, says the Gemara, that is a machlekes, older machlekes, as we see. It's already a machlekes. Meisvei asked the Gemara, she says, Rav Yechanan says you're chayiv. The pasuk says, "Me'amaretz ba'sa." The pasuk says, someone does an avera from among the people by his sin. Prat, that excludes a mummer. This excludes that the only time there's a carbon is if someone does a mistake, that if you were to know about the mistake that he did, then he would refrain from the mistake. But a mummer, one who is not a shemer Torah mitzvahs, wouldn't refrain if he knew what he was doing. Shimon Yasi Omer Mishim of Shimon Einay Tzarech Hari Omer. Why? Because it already says, Asher lo yisasena b'shkaga. The pasuk already says he wasn't done b'shkaga as a shoyeg. Va'asham ayhayde, or he knows about it, and from here we learn out Hashem miyidiyasai maybe karban al shigasai, loishem miyidasai maybe karban al shigasai. You'd only bring a carbon if, when you were to know about it, you would refrain from doing the avira. 4 lines from the bottom, so it says the Gemara v'misa haloshem miyidiyasai. This person who is nischalif lechelev b'shuman, he would not stop if he found out what it was. Why would he not stop? Because Bezdin just asking that the chalev is mutter. So it's true, he thought that it was Shuman. But if he found out that it was a mistake, would he stop? No! Because Bezdin just said this is mutter. So says the Gemara, there should still be no carbon akasha Rav Yechanan. Amar Papa, Kasavar Rav Yechanan, Kim the Chemisyat Lula Beidina. Haji Behu. If Bezdin were to know they made a mistake, they would back out. Vunami Hadar Bay. Therefore, Shebi Yas and Korean Bay. Therefore, there is a chiyav. V'chayav is a chiyav carbon. Amai Rava. Umay Derav. Shein Amashal Rav Tzibur. My time Amar Krav Shkaga. Shikulam B'Shkaga Achas. That says Rava, really tying together the first 2 parts of this Amid, says Rava, but this person would not be included in the classical parallel in Dover B'Tzibur, because it all has to be the same level of shoygig. Now that we finished the first din of the Mishnah, the din that if you did something based on a psak bezdin, it's not called a shoygig and there's no carbon. Says the Gemara, there were 3 cases in the Mishnah. Whether Bezdin themselves ate the chalev and you ate it, whether you ate it and then Bezdin ate it, or whether Bezdin never ate it but you just listened to their psak halacha. So says the Gemara, Lamdi lemisti kolhani. Why do we need all 3 cases? Bishlam Reisha loizu avzu katani. That's a classical stylistic that the Gemara builds in Chiddush. But in the Sefer really should have rewritten in the opposite. So says the Gemara as we turn over to Beis and Beis. No, there's a different style of a Mishnah. Zu ein sarach laimar zu. That it's true that once it said it, it's pashut the following cases. That's another style that this and something else. Says the Gemara on the top line of Beis and Beis. So the Mishnah goes on to cases that someone heard of psak halacha. They followed Bezdin, even though they themselves were knowledgeable. And they themselves knew that what? They themselves knew that it was the wrong psak. Says the Gemara, Tarti Lamali, why do we need to have 2 cases? Amarav, it's Chaminahani, Mili Gamar Visavir, Aval Gamar V'Leisavir Loi. Says Rava, I would have thought the Mishnah is only talking about a case of when one realizes Bezdin made a mistake, when he's both Gamar, he has the knowledge, Visavir, and he could paskin halacha. Aval Gamar, let's say someone has knowledge, but V'loi Savir, he's not able to paskin halacha, is loi. So I would think that case doesn't exist. That's when the Mishnah listed both cases. It says the Gemara, 1 second, Amli Abaye, to Rava, lehoira. But the Mishnah said, a Talmud that's ra'i lehoira. What does it mean he's ra'i lehoira? That same word hoira. Tabaskin, hoiru, tabaskin, horius. What does it mean? Gamar visavir mashma. That's mashma mamish. Only Gomer v'Savir, not one who's both Gomer and not Savir. So responds Rava, you're right. This is what I meant. If it was the first case of the Mishnah, I would have thought. And therefore, it comes out that the extra words, Mishnah Yisera, that the Mishnah articulated Gomer and Savir, you learn the exact opposite. Gomer v'loy Savir or Savir v'loy Gomer, which often we have, even though it might sound counterintuitive, but we often have such an idea that whenever there's the extra clause, comes to teach something, even if it is mamish fakert. Says the Gemara, what did the Mishnah say? Israel Kigoin man, who is a person, says the Gemara, who's a Talmud Horayos, Amar Rav Shimon ben Azai v'Shimon ben Zema. Amar le'Abaye, ki agavna mezidhu. What do you mean? If they're on such a level and they still do the Aveira, why is that called a shegeg at all? They know it's Aser and they go and they do it. That's amazing. Responds the Gemara, L'taimei chad tanya, which learns in a brayso b'asei achas yachreis v'pi hatzmai chayiv v'ras bezin is patzer. Keitza, what's the case? Hayrebez yishachel moter v'nay delachamim shato. I tell me the yashav l'fneim v'roy lo'iraki goin Shimon ben Azai yachalei pater. You would think he's pater. Tam leimer b'asei say achas yachreis al hatzmai chayiv v'ras bezin is pater. But says the Gemara, but if this is all true, mamish the exact same kasha, how can you find the case of someone that's ever going to have a shogeg? That's how you're going to have to explain the pasuk. Last week's parsha, pasuk says, so they tell me knew the psak halacha. But you know what he messed up in? He messed up that he thought that even though this is the psak, he thought that there's an overarching mitzvah, which there is. He just applied it incorrectly. He thought there's an overarching mitzvah, lishmaya divrei chachamim. And that's the mistake that he made, and that's where the chiyuv comes from. And we quote the end of the Mishnah that says, contrasting the two halves of the Mishnah, that if you did it on your own, you're chayiv. If you did it al pi bezin, you're pater. Says the Gemara, the classical shaila la'asuyim. What is the zaklal coming to include? La'asuye mavit b'hayra. Come to include one who rebels against a bezdin in general. In general, this is a guy that does not listen to bezdin. And now what happened is bezdin paskind something. Let's look at Rashi. Rashi over here teaches us Shema Yaragal Liyos Mavit Bahira. He doesn't generally listen to a bezdin. And then bezdin comes along and says Chelev is mutter. And he goes and he listens to bezdin and he eats a Chelev. You would think he listened to bezdin. No, he's chayiv. Why? He never listens to bezdin. So this is also called that he's not listening, and therefore when he eats a chelev, he must be doing it maybe atzmai, and he's not doing it because bezdin said, and that's the reason why in such a scenario he'll be chayiv a carbon, and that's what the end of the Mishnah is coming to include. And what about the next case? It says if you lie in bezdin, that's coming to include hayra bezdin v'yadu shatov v'chazru bahen. Bezdin paskint, and then they realized they made a mistake, and they were chayzer. They retracted that which they said. So if someone now didn't hear the chazara of bezdin, and they went and they ate, they did that thing that bezdin originally said is okay, then they're going to be pater for the chatas, even though bezdin already retracted. Says the Gemara, habedya katanila. But that case is explicit in the next Mishnah, which we'll get to tomorrow, Gimel and Beis. Tana v'hader mefar. Says, you're right. The Mishnah says it, includes it in the general rule, then explains it in the next Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Going back to the beginning of the Mishnah. Zu Divri Rabbi Yehuda. The Mishnah, our Mishnah, is the psak of Rabbi Yehuda. Avachachamim Aimrim. Yachid Sha'isa B'Hayras Bezdin Chayiv. Not like our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said if you listen to bezdin, you're pater. Says the Gemara, no. Rabbi Yehuda holds if you listen to bezdin and you do naveira, you're chayiv a carbon. My Rabbi Yehuda, which Rabbi Yehuda? Tani Nefesh Achasecha Tebesh Kaga Basa Yisrael Gimel Miyutin. The pasuk is 3 levels of miyut that you learn in this pasuk. Nefesh, Achas, Asoisa. 3 ways the pasuk singles out a person. What do we learn out? It says Rabbi Yehuda Haisa Mipi Atzma Yechayev. By Ras Bezdin, you're going to be Potter. That's how Rabbi Yehuda is going to learn. My Rabbanon. So says the Gemara. So what's going to be Rabbanon? So according to Rabbi Yehuda, Nachma one more time, Ba'asaisa teaches us only if he does something on his own. But if he does something based on the Bezdin, then he's going to be Potter. So this Brisa doesn't say Rabbi Yehuda, but the Gemara is learning that this is Shitas Rav Yehuda, as we'll see at the end of the Amud. So my Rabbanon, Ditani, Adain, Ani Omer Miyat Kal, Shechatu Chayavim, why? Shin Bezin Vin Al Yedei Par. Bezin will not bring a par if such an avera was done. Rav Kal Shechatu Yepturin, Shrei Bezin Mevin Al Yedei Par. Tamler Me Amaretz, Afilu Rubav, Afilu Kula, all do the avera. So says the Gemara, B'mai, what's this case? If it's a shogig in action, Bezdin Shalei Bahira, Bezdin might have been a time, it has nothing to do with Bezdin. Shalei Bahira is Bezdin. Excuse me, Bezdin Maya Vidtayu, Shalei Bahira is Bezdin. What does that have to do with Bezdin? Bezdin mi Maisi Shalei Bahira. Is Bezdin ever going to bring a parallel of Davar if they didn't paskin incorrectly? Of course not. The whole halacha is a parallel of Davar is when Bezdin paskins incorrectly. Ella says the Gemara, Behayra, Vaki Ksiv me Amaretz, Shigas Maiso Dichsif. So when do we have a case in which there's going to be a chatas based on the Psaka Bezdin? Ella Vaki Kamar, Miyat Kalshachatu B'Shigas Maisa. If it's a minority of the people, Chayavim, Shemizim Al Deyam Bar, Bayra, because Bezdin doesn't bring a carbon because it's only a Miyat. Ha'in Chayav Yachol, Ha'in Chayavim. So Rabbi Yehuda learns out from here. What does this imply? Ha'in, ha'in, chayavin, excuse me. Which implies that they themselves, the miyot, yes, have to bring the carbon. Yachol, Rav, Tiber, Shas, Meshikas, Maisi, Petur, and Shari Bezin, Vina, Le'empire. So if it's a Rav, they'd be potter, because Bezin already does by Rav. Afilu Rubai, even if it's a Rav, there still will be the chiyav of carbon. So we see in this Brisa, this is the machlekes Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. We'll stop over here as our Papa's going to come along and he's going to argue, but it's getting late. We'll pick it up from here. B'siyata Dishmaya.